It's good to be here today. I'm really excited about what we are sharing about beyond the song, just in terms of our lifestyle of worship and where our attention is, where our focus is, why we need to do what we need to do in order to draw nearer to God. Because God's just waiting for us to draw nearer to Him so He can impart what He has for us in His life. And we've got the Life Summit coming up next year, March. I know I'm talking about next year, March already, but guys, it's October. December's in like a month's time almost. It's a bit crazy. But we've got the summit coming up, and the summit isn't just a conference that we're doing as a church because that's what churches do once a year, and that's just part of our rhythm. No, we really believe that as a church we're called to impact not just this city but our country and this continent. And in the current scope of what our political environment looks like, we can easily be disheartened as people, wondering, well, when are things going to get good? We thought we got through winter and we thought, well, load shedding's done. And all of a sudden this week, a conveyor belt breaks and load shedding starts. And then you start hearing about the various types of unrest that's happening within our state-owned equity entities and all these things. And you can easily become disheartened. But what we're trying to do as a church for the summit in March is that we're trying to reposition our perspective as Christians, as people that are not in the kingdom of the world, but are in the kingdom of God, and what that means for us and the type of influence we need to carry and the type of attitude that we need to step into positions that are potentially compromising. What our perspective needs to be when those things are. So we haven't just invited speakers out of random, but we've invited people that are going to come and speak directly into the current context of things. Martin Steele is a lifetime long friend of Pastor Anthony, but he also shares one of the best messages I've ever heard about kingdom culture and our position as Christians and how we're called to influence the atmosphere and the environment of our country and our city and our suburbs. Phenomenal guy, but then we've also got Pastor Chris Matebula coming. Pastor Chris, his testimony blows me out of the water, first of all. Coming off of the streets, coming out of drugs, coming out of alcohol, someone believing in him, going to Bible college, and now he's leading an incredible work in Johannesburg. But not just the church that he's leading, but the ears that are hearing his voice. You've got the prime ministers or the ministers of parliament. You've got the president leaning into him to hear what he has to say at the moment. A person off the streets that is now giving a voice into the political environment in our country. He's got an incredible perspective that we need to hear as a church. That we can step into a place where we can believe that even us as a church of 500-600 people can impact a nation. So I want to ask you to be intentional. Don't wait for February 28th to sign up for Summit. Start praying into what 2020 looks like for you now, as an individual, as a child of God, as a person with authority, as a person of influence, and how you can position yourself to have a greater confidence and a greater strength and courage in your individual context, in business, in entrepreneurship, in schools, whatever it might be. All right. So we're going to do that, and I'm really excited for that. But I want to start off by kind of leaning into that conversation as well. Because we're talking about worship and where our perspective lies as worshipers of God. And where our perspective lies as children and kings and queens of God's kingdom. And we can look at our current situation within our country and feel disheartened. We can feel depressed. We can feel almost disconnected from a hope position because things are just that bad. But I've got to believe that we as Christians, as children of God, as people who are Jesus followers, born again, slain by the Spirit, fanned into flame, Jesus believers, Christians, that we've got to see this country and look at it and see a different picture, a preferred future, a future of hope and promise and prosperity, because we don't live in our current context of what the world sees as South Africa, but we see what God sees through the lens of His eyes and His heart for our country and our city. And what happens when we come as worshipers of God into our situations at work, into potentially racial conflict, into potential chaos, And what our perspective is when we actually see that happening, saying, I'm not going to step away from the situation, but I'm going to lean into God and hope and pray and have faith that He's going to give me a vision for what needs to happen. I've got to believe that we as the church, not as the building, not as 30 Main Road 3 Anchor Bay, but we as the church, the people, the congregation, the followers of Jesus Christ, the ones that have been forgiven, the ones who have had His blood shed over us, that we have to have a different perspective about where our hope lies. We have to be there. But for a person that doesn't know God, a person that doesn't know the grace of Christ and what He had to do for us, a person that could potentially be isolated, could potentially feel like they're in a job that they hate, or they're just doing because they need the salary, because they need to support their family. I'm not disregarding that. That's amazing that you're doing it. But God is wanting to position us for even more than just that. And there's some of us in the room that we don't know God and we don't know how to worship. But in order to get into that place of worship, we need to have a focus and attention on Him. There's people in this room that don't understand the need to worship God. They worship so many other things. You go to a soccer game like Kaiser Chiefs and Cape Town United last night. Cape Town won. Sorry, Kaisers, you guys lost. You know, maybe make a comeback. I doubt it. But for those people that don't know God, their need for worship lies in different avenues that don't have the fulfillment of what God has for our lives. God is an insecure God, but I want to tell us today that the one thing that was only designed for Him and limited to Him was worship. Our worship is about God. It's not about anything else. I can go to a football game, I can go to a soccer game, and I can shout and scream as loud as I want. I'm not worshiping them, but I'm just being patriotic about my team, Man United. All right? We're going to watch the rugby game in a few moments' time. I'm going to be patriotic about South Africa, but they aren't my God who I worship. I'm not going to pray to God and say, God, please let the Springboks win today. That is not my form of worship. Because my worship is primarily and only dedicated towards God. Now you might think, well, what is up with God? Why does He want us to worship Him? Our God isn't a God like the deities of the Greek nations, where the more worship these deities received, apparently the more powerful they got. Our God isn't like that. Our God is immediately all-powerful all at the same time, without any prayer needed. He is not an insecure God that needs us to worship Him because He needs affirmation about His status and His ego. He is not a God that feels entitled, that He deserves worship. No, He wants us to worship Him because He knows that we need to worship Him. Because He knows that when we worship Him, something's going to happen that's going to cause a transformation, that's going to change our perspective from depression to joy, to isolation, to community, to sadness, to rejoicing, from standing still to dancing, from singing off key to singing in key. I don't know how, but somehow. But He is not a God that feels entitled. The Bible says He's a jealous God. But He's not jealous in the way that He's angry about a situation. He's jealous like a father would be to a child, seeing a child going into an incorrect circumstance or a potentially compromising situation, knowing what that child needs, and being a jealous father, shouting out and crying to his children to say, don't go there. What I have for you is so much better. I've given you a choice, but I'm hoping that you're going to choose me, because what I have for you is going to fulfill you in so many other ways than what that's going to give you. He is a jealous God because He loves you with no limits, with unlimited grace, with absolutely everything accessible to you. Because He's not just your King, but your Father and your Redeemer and your Restorer and your miracle maker and your way. Our worship is about Him. But some people don't know God. God is distant for some people. Some people remember going to Sunday school and remember a message about Moses that their teacher might have told them so many years ago. I was in that position for many years until God actually came across my path and intercepted my path. So many people have busy work days. They invest their heart and they invest their time 24/7 into their work situation, and for 20 days a year in their leave, they break away to get rest because they need a break from what their head is in all day, every day, sometimes too much. They need rest, so they go to the mountains and they do hiking. They take up a hobby, they take up painting or whatever it is. And that's great, but can I tell you the type of rest that you will get when you know God is not just our Father, but our energy restorer, our way maker? When we know God is our first point of rest and everything else follows on but beyond that, our bucket won't just sit at 50% all the time that we're trying to catch up to, but our bucket will go to overflow. And when we overflow, we have an abundance to give and not just the small seed that we try to give sometimes. When our worship is about God, we understand that in order for us to get a bit of reprieve from our daily responsibilities, we know that we need to get into His presence before His throne on our knees and saying, God, I need a bit of you because I need a bit of revelation. Because God, I need a bit of inspiration. God, I need a mentor. And God, there's no one coming across me. I've tried everything that I can do. But God, I know that you are the greatest human traffic controller of all time. That you can bring someone across my path that will speak into my life, not from a worldly context, but from your revelation. Because He loves you too. For you that are entrepreneurs and CEOs, you might need funding and investing. And you've been networking your feet to the bone, and you are so tired and you haven't found the resource. And I want to tell you this today. When you bring your focus and your attention to God, He is going to bring the funding that you need to come your way because your attention is on Him and not the resource that is given, but on Him because He is the giver of the resource. If you need someone to whatever it might be, help you to mediate a conflict situation, to give you a bit of wisdom, to give you a bit of community and a bit of company, to spoil you at some point. Can I tell you, when you get before God, those things are going to come. Not because we deserve them all the time, but because we have a gracious and generous God. And He just wants our attention because He knows what we need. When our worship is about God, we set all of our distractions aside. Recognize our need for His presence and His revelation and His inspiration. And we get before Him and we worship Him. And it's not just necessarily in song, but it's intentionally making time to say, God, I need you today, every day. Give us today our daily bread. And forgive us our trespasses, as you help us to forgive those who trespass against us. It's interesting how Jesus went to that Samaritan woman and said, I will give you something that will quench your thirst forever. And on that time, He had that Samaritan woman's complete focus because she knew that He was about to give her something that she had never received in her life. She knew the magnitude. She knew the significance. She knew the importance. In amidst all the doubts of what history had told her about the Jewish people, she saw a Jewish man at a well and knew immediately that this person had something to give that she could never comprehend. Because her worship all of a sudden became about God. Our worship is about our attention to Him. Our worship is about our focus on Him completely. And I love doing these worship songs where I get excited and I start jumping around or I start moving because, not just because I enjoy singing, but because in those moments I'm not thinking of anything else. And it's no wonder that every church service that I'm in that moment, I leave refreshed, not thinking about my problems, but thinking about solutions already. Because all of a sudden my worship has been drawn into a focus of Him. Him being my King. Him being my Father. Him being my provider. Him being my resource. Him being my healer. Him being my miracle maker. 2 Corinthians 3 verse 13 to 18 says this. We are not like Moses. This is Paul speaking to the Corinth church. We're not like Moses, who would put a veil over his face to prevent the Israelites from seeing the end of what was passing away. But their minds were made dull, for to this day the same veil remains when the old covenant is read. It has not been removed, because only in Christ is it taken away. Even to this day, when Moses is read, a veil covers their hearts. But whenever anyone turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. Now, the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is. Do you believe that there is freedom when you turn to God? Because He's already said the veil has been taken away. That moment when He was on the cross and He took His very last breath and He said, it is finished. The veil tore from bottom to top, and that separation between the Holy of Holies and the rest of the Jewish nation was all of a sudden accessible. Because Jesus took the veil away. And in that life where the Jewish people were riddled by laws and riddled by failure because they could never keep up with the amount of sin they had, all of a sudden Jesus came and He demanded all of their attention. And even if they didn't like it or not, even if they were criticizing and scrutinizing Him, He was there in the middle on the cross, having received something that no one else had ever received. A level of punishment that He did not deserve, but He took on because He knew the people that He had to represent. And in that moment, He demanded everybody's attention. And He took His last breath. And He looked you and I in the eyes. He said, that struggle that you're struggling with, it is done. That poverty that you're struggling with, it is done. That depression that you're struggling with, it is done. That writer's block of entrepreneurship that you're struggling with, it is done. I'm waiting to position your feet because it is done. You no longer have to struggle and strain and strive because it is done. Because I have taken that veil away and I have given you complete access to the Father who is your giver of life in every single aspect of your life. But whenever anyone turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. And now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And we all, who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory, are being transformed into His image with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. I need you to lock into that word, contemplate. Contemplate isn't just that you're thinking about it. Contemplate isn't just that you are wondering about the word or wondering about what you've just heard. Contemplate is physically talking about how you can put what you've just heard into action. You're meditating it. You're putting distraction aside from what you've just, what's been before that, and you're putting that phrase in front of you, and you are contemplating on how you can integrate this into your life because you have a perceived benefit of what you've just seen. When we contemplate on God's glory, we're contemplating on His goodness. We're contemplating on His mercy. We're contemplating on His grace. We're contemplating on His fatherhood. We're contemplating on His peace and His joy. And the things that are lacking in our lives, He takes the veil away so that when we contemplate, we're not just saying we want to put this action into action. We're saying it's going to happen because He's already made it happen. We're contemplating His glory in our lives. And the passage says that we go from ever-increasing glory. So when we actually contemplate about Jesus' grace and how that veil was torn away, you go from glory to glory to glory to glory, and from peace to peace to peace to peace and joy and joy and joy. And hopefully the person that you are today won't be the person that you are 10 years' time, because the amount of joy that is exuding from you is from a place of contemplation of His glory. But when we focus our attention on Him, we bring all of our distractions, we cast them aside. Remember, I spoke about casting our crowns. We take all of our crowns and we cast them off at God's feet, and we say, God, you have my attention. Unrestrained, unlimited, for perpetuity, you have my attention. God, your servant is listening. Even Jesus said that. What moment happens? What happens when we lock eyes with our Creator? See, Moses was coming down from the mountain. He just had undedicated time, or dedicated time with God, unlimited dedicated time with God on the mountain. And his face was so bright that they had to put a veil across his face, because as he descended, the Israelites saw him and they had the same reaction to him as what the Jewish people had when God was descending down to them in the cloud. They shied away and they said, your face is too bright. The amazing thing is, God had unlimited dedicated time to God, and all of a sudden, because of that, he began to change. His face shone. His image was different. There was something physically different about him. And can I tell you, that happens each and every single day, that when we come into a space where our time and our attention is dedicated to God, we leave different. All of a sudden, when we woke up and we were tired, something else is different about us. When we look at ourselves in the mirror, the crow's feet in the corner of our eyes aren't deep etched into the bone anymore. They're just a light blur on our face. When we get into God's dedicated presence, all of a sudden our hearts aren't beating with dismay, but they are, but it is beating with rejoicing and courage and strength and bravery and authority and influence. All of a sudden, our attitude and our posture changes because we've been in God's presence. And whoever sees us isn't going to see us just by when we encounter them, but they will see us from a mile away, because something is different about our complexion. What happens when we lock eyes with our Creator? When we understand that there is nothing interrupting our connection between God and ourselves. That when we understand that we have unlimited all access to God and His faithfulness and His provision, how will our attitude change about our lives that we live and the country that we live in when we understand that the God that we serve, the God that has all authority in all the nations of the world, that He created them? How much will our attitude change about our country? And when we realize, when we tap into Him, we can change our country. We can change our context. I love Matthew's passage because he tapped into God. He dedicated his family and his life to God, and the context of his family and their situation changed. And it wasn't out of a place of wanting to be wealthy. It wasn't out of a place. He just wanted to support his family. He just wanted to have enough money in the bank so that he can feed his kids at the end of the month. That's all he was asking for. But he dedicated all of his time to God. What happens to our attitude when we lock eyes with our Creator? I believe that we'll carry a new authority. And for this reason, I believe that we need to worship more than we ever have because of where we are in our country right now. I had a friend over for dinner last night. His car was safe when he parked it, and it was broken into. And something that he treasured was taken. Now, you can look at that and say, I'm sick and tired of this. I see broken windows all over the place. Let me just get out of here. But when we have a faith about who God is in the context of why we're here, realizing that you and I as people of God and children of God aren't here by default, but we're here by design to make a change. We're here by design to bring hope. We're here by design to bring a future to people that we encounter on the streets every single day. That we are carrying something more precious than they could ever imagine. If we just lock our attention onto God. From this point on, worship on a Sunday is never going to be the same for me ever again. Because I believe that when I come and worship God, and that worship extends into my day-to-day week, that the things that I say and the way that I lead and the wisdom that I impart and the people that I encounter, those are going to carry significance because I am giving my attention to God right from the start. These worship sessions are never going to be the same for me ever again. Because I'm never going to come in distracted ever again. I'm going to be completely, utterly focused on God. I won't ever arrive late again. I won't ever come in looking a certain way. Because I believe when I enter into God's presence, something is about to change. I'm hitting the start button on something that God is trying to do in my life. I've got to believe that when we worship God, our country is going to change. I've got to believe that when we worship God, our government is going to change. I've got to believe that when we worship God, our state-owned entities are going to change, and all of a sudden they won't be lost, but they will be a profit. Because the worshipers of God are in the mix, influencing opinion. Hebrews 12, verse 1-3 says this, and the band can come up. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. You notice it's not marked out by us, it's marked out for us. And just by getting into God's presence, He's realigning us with that race that He's marked out for us. That no longer is it a blurred line that we're trying to navigate across, but the line is as clear as day. The race that He has marked out for us. And fixing our eyes on Jesus. You're locking eyes with Him. It's literally everything else that is outside of your contact with Jesus and His eyes is blurred. Nothing is taking your focus away from that. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and the perfecter of our faith. The pioneer of our faith. The one who went before us, who knows the plans He has for us. The one who went ahead of us to take victory for us when we thought we were going to have a trial. The one that went before us to prepare a place for us. That Jesus, that pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before Him, He endured the cross. Can you believe it? He did this joyously. He did this rejoicing. Scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the God, of the throne of God. Consider Him. Fix our eyes on Him. Consider Him. Contemplate Him. Who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you and I will not grow weary and lose heart. The message is written all over the Bible. Even Jesus said, "Come to me, you who are weary, and I will restore you." The message is all over. I don't know how we've ever seen it, ever not seen it. To say if you're tired, go to Him and have rest. If you need a break, go to Him and get your bucket filled. If you need distraction, get into His Word and put Him first. Because only then will you find out what it means to be fulfilled. Only then will you find out what it means to be forgiven. Only then will you find out what it means to carry a light burden. Only then you will find out what it means to be able to forgive. And not forgive, but still remember. But be able to forgive and forget with a grace that cannot be comprehended, because as we contemplate His glory, we are being transformed into Him. And how we respond to conflict, and how we respond to trials, and how we respond to obstacles, all of a sudden isn't out of a place of limitation, but it's out of a place of knowing that we are the sons and daughters of the Most High, who was and who is and who ever will be our only God. Because at one point, Jesus made sure that everybody fixed their attention on Him. So we're going to go into some worship now. And I want us to have a moment where we declare our undistracted attention on our God, who is our Savior and our Redeemer and our Maker and our Creator. So come on, worship team, lead us this morning.